بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لتلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا علام. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك، وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وهلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يدا، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، مع حاجة بي إليه عظيما، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطأ وعمدي أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا، وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، وذلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهل عليك، ولعل الذي أبطأ عني هو خير لي بعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا رب إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي وأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين، رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق، باسط الرزق، فالق الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى، وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعادله. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظمى، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعسي ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازي. فكم من موهبة حنيئة قد أعطاني وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبهجة مؤنكة قد أراني فأثني عليه حامدا واذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد السائل ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. الحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في خمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبع العظيم. وصل على صديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. وصل على سبت الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وخفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله. مكن له دينه الذي ارتديته له أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم اظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارطق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وعزز به ذلتنا، واغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مخرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وانجح به طلبتنا، وانجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، واعتنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، واعتنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، واذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق. آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآله، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه، وسلطان حق تظهره، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم برحمتك في الصالحين فأدخلنا، وفي عليين فارفعنا، بكأس من معين من عين سلسبيل فاسقنا، ومن الحور العين برحمتك فزوجنا، ومن الولدان المخلدين كأنهم لؤلؤ مكنون فأخضمنا، ومن ثمار الجنة والحوم الطير فأطعمنا، ومن ثياب السندس والحرير والإستبرق فألبسنا. وليلة القدر، وحج بيتك الحرام، وقتلا في سبيلك فوفق لنا، وصالح الدعاء والمسألة فاستجب لنا. وإذا جمعت الأولين والآخرين يوم القيامة فارحمنا، وبراءة من النار فاكتب لنا، وفي جهنم فلا تخلنا، وفي عذابك وهوانك فلا تبتلنا، ومن الزقوم والضريع فلا تطعمنا، ومع الشياطين فلا تجعلنا، وفي النار على وجوهنا فلا تكببنا، ومن ثياب النار وسرابيل القطران فلا تلمسنا، ومن كل سوء يا لا إله إلا أنت، بحق لا إله إلا أنت فنجنا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم، من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل، أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم، المشكور سعيهم، المغفور ذنوبهم، المكفر عن سيئاتهم. وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية، وتوسع في رزقي، وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به لدينك، ولا تستبدل بي غيري. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان، أو يطلو الفجر من ليلة هذه، ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنبا تعذبني عليه.
The reason I pause is because I'm waiting for them to give me the cue that we can start with the YouTube video. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبي إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآله محمد. These last, I think 7 days or 8 days that we've been together, I've been going through different ahkam of the prayer. And instead of just going through the ahkam themselves, I have been looking at ahadith from which those ahkam are derived, hoping to also derive some additional spiritual insight and just to get a feel for how the imams themselves talk. And it's a very refreshing, a very different kind of a way of addressing us, and there's a lot of benefit to be had. We reached to the point where we're talking about the takbiratul ihram, so we've gone through the niyyah, the intention that you must have, the standing position of the qiyam, and now the third of the wajibat, which is also a rukn of the prayer, is the takbiratul ihram in particular, and that's the takbir that you say to start the prayer. It's called takbiratul istiftah as well in ahadith, because you're beginning the prayer with this takbir. So we spoke a little bit about the requirements. It must be spoken. Simply thinking it is not sufficient, just like with everything that counts, even dua. We are not called on to say dua in our head. Even a dhikr that you want to say or a dua you want to say, you should speak it. At least whisper it so you yourself can hear it. I'll share a hadith with you a little bit later when we talk about qira'ah that says that the only dua or qira'ah that counts is what is heard. Right? What's in your head doesn't count. All right, so it has to be spoken. It needs to be pronounced correctly. It needs to be pronounced correctly as well. And that goes for all of the prayer. We want to make sure that we're pronouncing things correctly. Particularly important is the qira'ah, which we'll talk about shortly. But even with the takbiratul ihram and all the wajib dhikrs that you say in the prayer, you want to make sure that you're pronouncing it in Arabic, right? Not in Urdu, not in Farsi, not in English, right? With those accents and those mispronunciations, right? So zwad and zoi and those letters are not Arabic letters. Those may be in Urdu, but in Arabic it's dad, it's va, right? They're pronounced differently. Ayn is different from hamza. Oftentimes Urdu speakers and khojas and some of these other ethnicities who have learned Arabic, they tend to overcompensate. Hamzas become ains and ains become hamzas and has become has and has become has. So everything becomes a little bit mixed up. So those need to be corrected. Those are vital things because the prayer is something that we have to make our best effort to fulfill correctly, right? Now, if you have a speech impediment, that's one thing. Then you're excused for that because that's beyond your ability. Right? But it's just a matter of having mislearned and not having taken the effort to learn correctly, then you're liable. Right? So make sure that you have done your best to learn. You've checked it with somebody who can verify and tell you that you're pronouncing sufficiently. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't made that effort, then again, you're liable for that. One of the mustahabbat that we ended up speaking about yesterday is that when you say the takbir, which is the wajib thing, just speaking it, it's also mustahab to raise your hands, right? And we have all sorts of variations. One of the things that I marvel at, and I say this facetiously, is the variety of ways that we do things. Right? When you go to yoga class, when you go to like some martial arts class, when you go to other places, there are particular forms, particular hand positions, particular body positions that you have to assume, and a lot of effort is put in those kinds of classes. If it's a worthwhile class, the instructor will make sure that everyone's uniform. Your feet distance is perfect. Your hand position is just in the right place. Everything's got to be perfect to have, a downward facing dog has to be a particular way of angle in your position. Everything has to be just right. Otherwise, it's not right. But when it comes to prayer, we do have the exact same guidance. We have the exact same guidelines laid down by the Ahlul Bayt for us. So when you look at, a jama'ah of Muslims, in particular a jama'ah of Shia, we should have great uniformity in how we say our prayer. But it's unfortunately not the case. And the only explanation is that there's a distance, there's a gap between the knowledge and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and how much the Shia are willing to put an effort to learn that. Right? So let that not be the case. Let it not be the case that we are not uniform in saying our prayer. Yes, there is variation. To some extent, there is variation. So I mentioned like the mustahab distance of your feet for men is from 3 fingers to 1 hand span. So there's some variation there. But certainly it shouldn't be way spread apart. Usually the Shia don't have that problem just out of opposition to other schools that insist on spreading their legs very far apart. But the hand positions, for instance, we have very clear guidelines that you have to put your hands somewhere. So why not choose to put your hands where the Ahlul Bayt have told you to put your hands? Right? Instead of just randomly putting them anywhere. So you'll have people, I've seen people almost like in a soldier stance with their hands on their sides as they're praying, heads spread out, fingers spread out instead of together. So the mustahab way is to have your hands, here on your thighs for men, to have your hands here on your thighs, fingers and thumb all together facing perfectly down, and you're standing like that. So we shouldn't have that variation in how we're praying, the different positions. Even the sitting position, the julus, there's a recommended way for sitting, right? This tawarruk is there for men. There's that way with the knees up for women that I demonstrated earlier. So we have these recommendations. So why not follow in their footsteps and pray as they prayed? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, as the Prophet said. I pray the way you see me pray. So with the hand position, in the takbiratul ihram, also you see lots of variation. People have they put their thumb, hook it behind their ears, they put their hands up, they have their hands out. They're all different things, but the recommendation that we have is when you're lifting your hands, to lift it to the point where your hands, first of all, the fingers are all together, hands should be facing forward, and they come to the level where there are different expressions. Some say next to your cheeks. Some refer to the ears and say it should be even with your ears. That doesn't mean touching your ears. It means that the horizontal level, if you drew a line from your ears to your fingers, that they should be in line. So this is the position that you want to end up in when you're doing the takbir. Yeah. In terms of the timing, also we have guidance, right? So it's not get all ready, and as soon as the pistol goes off, you say Allahu Akbar. That's not right. Right? You're supposed to be in that standing position, and then when you want to start the takbir, you have 2 options. Either the best thing is, as you're moving up to this position, you say the takbir, Allahu Akbar, right? Or you say the takbir during the whole moving position, Allahu Akbar. Yeah, those are the 2 options. Right? So the first one again is Allahu Akbar, where as I'm moving up, I say the takbir. The other is up and down, I say the takbir the whole time. Allahu Akbar. Yeah? And that's the position that you want to assume. So one instruction for doing this, lifting your hands to that position, is in Surah Al-Kawthar, as I mentioned yesterday. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Right? Pray to show thanks for the great bounty that Allah has given you. Pray, and in that prayer, do nahr. Nahr, in this context, doesn't mean nahr of a camel. He's not saying pray and also sacrifice a camel. He's saying pray, and in particular in that prayer, do takbir. Lift your hands up to your nahr. It's your nahr that you have to aim for, not the camel's nahr. All right, so the nahr is this little notch here between the two clavicles, the jugular notch. So it's like a little depression that we have. Camels have a much deeper depression, so we all know about nahr as the alternate for slaughtering a camel, as opposed to dhabh, which is for slaughtering the other kinds of edible animals. But here, the significance is when you bring your hands up in this position, next to your cheeks, even with your ears, it's also in line with this jugular notch. And so Allah is referring to the nahr of yourself. Bring your hands up to your nahr. Yeah. So we have a few ahadith that tell us this. One I shared with you yesterday. Let me just read it quickly again. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam says, في قول الله عز وجل فصل لربك وانحر قال هو رفع يديك حذاء وجهك. When Allah says فصل لربك وانحر, when he says wanhar, what he means is it's the lifting of your hands up until they're in line or parallel with your face. Yeah. In another tradition, this is from Al-Asbagh ibn Nubata, quoting from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam. لما نزلت على النبي صلى الله عليه وآله فصل لربك وانحر قال يا جبرائيل ما هذه النحيرة التي أمر بها ربي. So when the verse is revealed to Rasulullah, he turns back to Gabriel, who's just brought the verse to him, and says, "O Gabriel, what is this sacrifice, this nahr, this nahira? What is this sacrifice that Allah has commanded me to do?" I explain what is the sacrifice I'm supposed to do when he says wanhar. So Gabriel responds, "Ya Muhammad, innaha laysat nahiratan, walakinnaha raf'ul aydi fi as-salah." He says, no, he doesn't mean a sacrifice of a camel here. He means that you should lift your hands during prayer. Yeah. So it gives you some of the dynamics. You see Rasulullah also, as the student of Gabriel, he's communicating to him what the intention behind a verse is, so he understands the implications. Rasulullah also asks a question very easily, very quickly, because he wants to make sure he's understood correctly. And so he asks, he gets the answer, and he clarifies what the intention is behind this particular commandment of Allah so he can exercise it properly. The next tradition also goes to the same idea. It talks about the takbir. What's interesting is at the end, it says the following. This is a hadith from I believe it's also from, anyway, I'm not sure actually who it's from. It doesn't tell us who it's from. So he says, لَيْسَتْ بِنَحِيرَةٍ وَلَكِنَّهُ يَأْمُرُكَ إِذَا تَحَرَّمْتَ لِلصَّلَاةِ أَن تَرْفَعَ يَدَيْكَ إِذَا كَبَّرْتَ. Right, so it's told that it's not a sacrifice, but rather when you want to say the takbir for your prayer, you're supposed to lift your hands to your face. At the end of the hadith, it says, what's the purpose of this? Like, why do we do this? Because saying the takbir was sufficient. Speaking the words Allahu Akbar was sufficient to start your prayer. Why this hand motion? Why the gesture? Is there some significance to it? So this hadith says, "Inna li kulli shay'in zinatan wa inna zinata as-salah raf'ul aydi inda kulli takbir." That everything has a kind of something that adorns it, some adornment that improves it, that makes it beautiful. And the adornment of the takbir is this hand gesture. Right? So it's not just a thing spoken, but rather some significance to it. Well, the way I was thinking of it is, even when I was growing up, when Islam was still, largely unknown and something very that people were very ignorant about, especially I grew up in the South. So it's, they would ask me, "Do you not eat? Are you not eating meat because you worship the cow?" I had questions like that growing up, and now it's probably far-fetched that our kids would have that kind of question because Islam is more well known. But even at that time, I remember caricatures of Muslims, cartoons of portraying Muslims or Arabs or whatever. When they showed the prayer, they would show people lifting their hands up and kind of going like that. Like that's one thing that kind of sticks out to people, that when a lot of Muslims pray, they go like this. They lift their hands and they do this. Like that's the one thing they remember. They don't necessarily remember the ruku and the sujood or any of the other things that we do, but that thing is something that sticks in people's minds. So maybe that's part of the connection, or that's a way to understand what they're talking about here, that this takbir, lifting your hands, gives some significance to these words. That now it's not just a thing said, but now there's an action as well. And that is a part of the nature of our salah that we have, is also that it combines these different faculties. Right? So some religions, or some people who follow religions, they have prayers that are simply, for instance, sitting down and saying something. Right? There's no bodily movement that engages with the worship. It's just that they're saying something, or they're just thinking something. They just meditate and they think, but they're not speaking. Right? But one of the important aspects of our prayer is it ties in all these different faculties. Yes, we're thinking because we're supposed to be focusing on what we're saying, but we're actually speaking, so our tongue is working. We're supposed to be able to hear what we're saying, so our ears are also engaged. Our body is also engaged. Right? So with multiple faculties, then there's more engagement, and there's more benefit, or at least chance for benefit. So all of that, I think, plays a role in trying to understand why these motions are there. One other tradition addresses this idea of kind of when people bring their hands up and go behind their ears or touch their ears. It says don't do that. This is from Imam Jafar as-Sadiq as well. He says, alayhi salam, إِذَا افتتحت الصلاة فكبرت فلا تجاوز أذنيك. He says, when you begin your prayer and you say the takbir, don't go past your ears. And so don't put your hands back here. Again, people will hook their ears, their thumbs behind their ears, or touch their ears. Don't do that. It's up here, in front of your face, like next to your cheeks, in line with your ears. Yes, so it's not down here, or, it's kind of in line with your ears, but it's here in front of your cheeks and in front of your neck. So don't go past your ears, he says. وَلَا تَرْفَعْ يَدَيْكَ بِالدُّعَاءِ فِي الْمَكْتُوبَةِ تُجَاوِزُ بِهِمَا رَأْسَكَ. And secondly, this is not related to the takbir, but he says when you say dua, so dua qunut, for instance, and don't lift your hands up above your head when you're saying dua. Again, you'll see people go like this. And the adab for it is to do it here in front of your face. Right? Don't lift your hands up above your head, he says, when you're making dua. One more tradition also from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam describes him, افتتح الصلاة فرفع يديه حيال وجهه واستقبل القبلة ببطن كفيه. So again, sometimes you'll see people going like this in the takbir. They have their hands like this. This hadith says that no, this person witnessed Imam Sadiq when he was saying his prayer and saying the takbir. He lifted his hands like this, so the palms of each hand was facing the qibla. Yeah, so not with your hands like this, like a karate chop, but facing the qibla like this. All right, one last tradition. We have a whole genre of ahadith that speak of they're called ilal al-shara'i'. So the illah is the cause or the reason, the philosophy behind. Right, so the philosophy behind certain laws. So Sheikh al-Saduq, rahmatullahi alayhi, he has a whole book where he's compiled all these kinds of ahadith. It's called Ilal al-Shara'i', the philosophy behind different laws. So there, ahadith where the ma'soom is saying that the reason why we pray like this is because of this. The reason why you do this is because of that. And they give some reasons. Sometimes the reasons are things that we can make sense of. Sometimes they're things that are maybe beyond what we can understand and comprehend. It doesn't seem like there's a clear connection between the reason and the action itself. But this one is nice. He talks about the reason behind the takbir and raising your hands like this. Al-Fadl ibn Sha'ban quotes from Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam. قال إنما ترفع اليدان بالتكبير لأن رفع اليدين ضرب من الابتهال والتبتل والتضرع. He says that the reason why hands are lifted, or you lift your hands during the prayer, is because in lifting your hands, there's a kind of declaration of surrender, of humbling yourself, of kind of giving up, right? We have that gesture in our American culture as well, right? So surrender is putting your hands up like this. So this hadith also ties into that. There's something not just American, but there's something more universal about that kind of showing your hands are empty and showing that you're surrendering. فأحب الله عز وجل أن يكون العبد في وقت ذكره له متبتلا متضرعا مبتهلا. So because that's a kind of a declaration of surrender and lowering yourself before someone, Allah wanted to make that connection. When you're starting your prayer and saying Allahu Akbar and saying Allah is great, that you should have that kind of gesture to show that you are humbling yourself before Him. لأن في رفع اليدين إحضار النية. Second reason he says is that there's a you're kind of calling together your mind and your heart to focus when you lift your hand. So again, if you had a prayer, imagine our prayer was just you're standing perfectly still and just saying things. It's harder to know when it begins, to kind of muster your intention and rev up your spirituality for the beginning. Right? If you just say, especially there's so many du'as that you say before the prayer, if you just are saying du'a after du'a before the prayer, and then you move into the takbir and fatiha, and there's no kind of a breaking point, there's nothing to break up that monotony, then there's no clear indication where it starts. Right? So then when you stretch out an act, then it becomes harder to focus. It becomes harder also to kind of know when you're supposed to start and when you're supposed to have that full attention to the details. And so for that reason, Allah has put the takbir as kind of a starting point. With the physical motion, then you know that this is where you have to have your presence of mind, so you know exactly what you're doing, what you're embarking on. وَإِقْبَالَ الْقَلْبِ عَلَى مَا So إِقْبَالَ الْقَلْب also. Bringing kind of your heart to the fore and bringing your heart into the action, that also happens from this motion of the takbir. All right, so those are some ahadith, again, just a sampling of ahadith that speak about the takbiratul ihram in the words of the ma'sumin. Salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. The next of the wajibat is what? You say the takbir and then there's qira'ah. Qira'ah is recitation of Fatiha and an additional surah. So just some of the rules that we have for this, you again do have to actually say the qira'ah. You have to actually do the qira'ah by speaking. Right? So never in your mind, but rather with your tongue, with your breath. And then there's just the difference between ikhfat and jahr. And that's a good distinction to know, a good vocabulary pair to know as well. So ikhfat, let's start with jahr. So jahr means to vocalize and to say it loudly, audibly. So the way I'm speaking now is bil jahr, right? Bil ikhfat does not mean silently, but rather just in a whispered tone. So no vocalization, just air. And it's quiet enough that only I can hear myself. Maybe most of the person next to me can hear me, but it shouldn't be something that other people can hear me. Right? We are required, of course, to say the whole Fatiha with the basmala. And then we're also required under normal circumstances to say a second surah. In wajib prayers, it's required to say the second surah. There are, under extenuating circumstances, if you're in a rush, you're allowed to omit the second surah. If you're in fear, you have to quickly get through because you're in fear of someone catching up to you or something. So that also is one of the extenuating circumstances where you can drop the second surah. Right? But under normal circumstances, you have to say both. Let me share one hadith that speaks to the integral nature of the Fatiha, that it must be said. This is probably from Imam Baqir or Imam Sadiq, Muhammad ibn Muslim, the companion to both of them. He quotes the following: سألته عن الذي لا يقرأ فاتحة الكتاب في صلاته. I asked the Imam about a person who prays but doesn't recite Fatiha. Is this possible? Is this correct? قال لا صلاة له إلا أن يبدأ بها. And there's no prayer for that person unless he begins with Fatiha. And لا صلاة إلا بفاتحة الكتاب. And no prayer can be offered without a Fatiha. That's one of the reasons sometimes you might have heard that we don't consider the janazah salah to be a true salah, because there's no Fatiha in janazah. Right? It's a dua, it's a series of du'as and takbirs, but it's not a proper salah, so to speak. Right? Because the Fatiha is not present. All right. Now, when we say it's a wajib, it's different from the other wajibat we've talked about so far. So if you remember, I laid out the basic structure, 11 wajib parts of the prayer. Out of those 11 wajibs, there are 5 that are arkan. A rukn is that cornerstone without which a thing can't stand. So the 3 that we talked about so far, niyyah, qiyam, and takbiratul ihram, those are all arkan, without which the prayer doesn't happen. Now, Fatiha, the qira'ah is not of the same stature. It's not a rukn of the prayer. And so if you it's kind of hard to imagine how you would forget it. But if you did forget it, or you forgetfully kind of skipped over it, then it wouldn't mess up your prayer. It's only if you intentionally omit it, then there's no prayer. All right. This next tradition is from Imam Ar-Rida alayhi salam. So this speaks to the reason why Allah has included Quran in the prayer. It could have just been dhikr. He said Allahu Akbar over and over again, done a certain number of different kinds of dhikr, but he included Quran in the prayer. Why is that? So Imam Rida alayhi salam says, أمر الناس بالقراءة في الصلاة لئلا يكون القرآن مهجورا مضيعا. He commanded us to recite Quran in the prayer so that the Quran would not be abandoned, so it would not be lost. Right? So again, if you had wajib prayer, fine. Muslims are very tenuous about the prayer at least, but it's not wajib to read Quran. Right? Besides the qira'ah that you have to do in the prayer, it's not wajib to read Quran. It's highly recommended. There's so much reward, there's so much benefit, all of that, but it's not wajib. Right? So if it were the case that you just have your wajib prayer with no Quran, and then the Quran it's mustahab to read, go and engage with it, then very likely many of us would leave it aside and never bother even memorizing a few surahs like we have memorized, recite them on a daily basis like we do, and we have to because it's wajib and it's a part of our prayer. So one of the reasons why Allah included the Quran in the prayer is so that we would at least have that much connection with the Quran, even if we don't have further connection, which we should. وَلِيَكُونَ مَحْفُوظًا مَدْرُوسًا. And not only should it be kind of preserved and saved, but also it should be protected and it should be studied. Right? So at least we have that much connection. We've memorized the Fatiha and maybe a handful of surahs, maybe Juz Amma if we've made some effort. And so we have a handful of surahs, I think it's 20, 25 surahs in Juz Amma at least. And so now we've preserved those, and now hopefully we'll have curiosity one day to read the translation, and then something will pique our interest, and we'll ask a question about it, we'll do some research about it, and we'll start to study it. So dirasa happens, and it becomes a madrus thing as well, a book that's studied, not something that's forgotten and or done as a ritual only. فَلَا يَضْمَحِلَّ وَلَا يُجْهَلْ. So the Quran doesn't fade away, so it's not people aren't ignorant of the Quran. So that's one of the reasons why Allah has placed the Quran in the prayer as qira'ah. This next point, this time frame is such a difficult time frame. I have a good sense for giving a 45-minute lecture, but giving a 25 or 30-minute lecture is such a awkward thing. The next point is really interesting because what's the difference between the Fatiha that we say in the first and second rak'ah, and why do we not say Fatiha in the third and fourth rak'ah? Right? Why do we say tasbihat arba'ah instead? Right? You can say Fatiha in those as well, but it's more recommended. It's better to say the tasbihat in the third and fourth rak'ah. So why is that the case? There's this idea of what's called tafweed. Right? Tafweed, there are different applications for this, but tafweed means that Allah has delegated certain authority and certain power over legislation to Rasulullah. Right? And so I'll just introduce you to the idea, and then I'll read the ahadith about this. It's a lot more detailed than what we can cover right now. But I think it's very interesting. I remember when I first learned this some years ago, when I was in the Hausa, it was just such an interesting thing that I never realized this. When Allah first legislated the prayer, the 5 daily prayers were actually 2 rak'ah each. Right? So each of the prayers was 2 rak'ah. That's what Allah made obligatory on us. The additional 2 rak'ah in the 4 rak'ah prayers, the additional 1 rak'ah in Maghrib prayer is what Rasulullah added. Right? He added these additional rak'ahs to give the 17 rak'ahs that we have of the wajib prayers during the day. Right? And once he did it, then Allah ratified it and said, this is good. This is now, this is also obligatory on people. But we use a different terminology for the 2 different kinds of legislation. What Allah makes wajib on us, or not even wajib, what Allah legislates for us is a faridah or a fard. Whereas what Rasulullah legislates for us is called a sunnah. Oftentimes we'll use that term, we say faridah means wajib and sunnah means mustahab, but that's not actually accurate. Right? In the vocabulary of the ahadith, faridah means anything Allah has legislated. So it's in the Quran saying you must do something, or it's very good to do something, it's recommended to do something. That's a faridah of Allah. Whereas a sunnah is where the Rasulullah has legislated by saying something's required, it's wajib for you, or it's mustahab for you. So there's no difference between wajib and mustahab, between faridah and sunnah. What's different is what's the source? Is it Allah himself giving legislation, or Rasulullah? Now, why would he do that? Why would he delegate that power? Well, partly to ennoble the Rasulullah, to give him that authority, to give him that honor of being part of the legislative process. Right? So the hadith I'll share with you tomorrow, inshallah, speaks about how before Allah gave him the ability and the authority to legislate, he first had to raise him to the point where his will and his desires would be in line with what Allah wants. There's first this ta'deeb that occurs, this kind of discipline and this nurturing and grooming of Rasulullah to the point where إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that you have this amazing character. Right? That didn't come, it wasn't just natural to Rasulullah, just like it's not natural to anyone else. Allah is the one who gave him the inspiration and the guidance and all of that to become as he was. And once he was at that status, where whatever he wants is exactly what Allah wants. He doesn't want anything that Allah doesn't want. Right? At that point, Rasulullah is not, we talk about Rasulullah, for instance, being mustajabu da'wah. Whatever he prays, Allah gives. It's because whatever he prays for is exactly what Allah wants anyway. He doesn't pray for something against Allah. Right? And so the same thing here with legislation. He legislates exactly how Allah wants to legislate as well. And Allah lifts him and kind of gives him this honor of allowing him to also legislate by delegating this power to him. So I'll read the ahadith to you tomorrow, and inshallah it'll be something very interesting for you to look forward to. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to learn from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, accept our fast during this month, and allow us to have the tawfiq to read Quran more, to offer our prayers not only more but also better and with more attention to the guidance that the Ahlul Bayt have given us. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah Maulana for Maulana Sehat and Salamti, and our young reciter Ali Muhammad Sehat and Salamti, please recite a loud salawat. Brothers and sisters, series of 4 majalis to commemorate the shahadat of our first Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Will take place starting May 1st, Saturday, through May 4th, Tuesday. These majalis will be addressed by Hujjatul Islam, Maulana Amir Mukhtar Faizi, inshallah. Amal for the night of the 19th and the 21st of Ramadan will take place on May 1st, Saturday, and Monday, May 3rd, inshallah. Tonight's iftar is being sponsored. Salawat. Tonight's iftar is being sponsored by the families of Brother Shahid Hussain, Brother Ijaz Walji, Mehdi Khawri, Hussain Chagini, and Sayyid Jafar Naqvi. For all these families, their sehat, salamti, and barakat, please recite a loud salawat. Let's recite a Surah Fatiha for their marhumeen, for these families marhumeen and all marhum mu'mineen and mu'minat, preceded by a loud salawat. Now it's Maghrib time. For the recitation of Maghrib Azan, I would like to request Brother Ali Jafri to please come forward. Brother Muhammad Wale Muhammad Salawat.